A ballerina's perspective, from performing with New York City Ballet and Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater to publishing poetry books and mentoring kids and teens. Join us in a weekly discussion with experts to gain mental health clarity and achieve growth and moral consciousness. Give our show a 5 stars, comment, share, and come along for the ride. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth, Grace, and Gratitude podcast. Today we have Dr. Diane Mueller, a board-certified sexologist with dual doctorates in naturopathic as well as acupuncture and oriental medicine. She's the founder of the Sex Education Center, mylibidodoc.com, and she hosts the Libido Lounge podcast, where she helps monogamous couples create more passion, desire, hotter sex, and better communication. So, a wonderful topic. So excited to chat today.
I'm excited to chat too. And I feel, Ari, like the conversation on sex when we're talking about things like growth, which I know is such an emphasis on your podcast, is honestly so left out of the conversation these days. It's still so taboo. But yet, and it's almost funny because sex allows for some of, I think, like the greatest growth and the greatest challenge, both for us as individuals, but in our communication, and how we communicate and grow closer to our partners, our lover. So I'm just so grateful to be here today. It's just such a needed topic.
I completely agree. I think so often when we do communicate, we lack intentionality. And I think that also stems from some kind of feelings of guilt or shame, whether it is conscious or subconscious. So that can carry out from the bedroom to the bedroom. So it's like when we're not communicating based on our authenticity, whether it is based in shame or not, I feel like how can we ever take off our clothes, because we're not even taking off our mask, our disguise, our kind of like what we project outwardly, but it's still kind of limited to who we actually are.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the communication, like you said, is just such a big component of it. It is. It's like what's happening in the bedroom is such a reflection for life. And what's happening in life oftentimes is reflection in the bedroom. And I think people can understand that. And just thinking about it, so common when people go through breakups that people will say, like, oh, the sex, the intimacy really started fading off, or people become no longer interested, or their own libido is falling. So I think sometimes there's a connection, when things get really out of balance and people separate. But there's also these like day to day out of balances, these things that we don't say, being upset because our partner forgot to take the trash out when they walked out the door, being upset because some tone was used, being upset because we weren't validated in a certain way. And all these tiny things that are in many ways no big deal, over time, they can actually become quite a big deal. And they can certainly lead to not communicating well in life. And then, of course, not communicating well in the bedroom.
100%. And when it does come to kind of expressing yourself with a more healthy perspective, how can couples do that when it comes to sexuality and intimacy? How can they begin to do that even?
Yeah, I mean, begin is the real right word here because there is a layered approach to this. But I always like to, give people actionable steps anytime I do interviews because I'm just a woman of action. And I think that's when we make change in the world, right? Change in ourselves. So the one of the most important things to understand is when we are talking about communication, we are usually, when it comes to sex, under a higher amount of self-preservation type of energy than when other conversations are had. And so research has looked at this, and what research has shown is that in regular conflict conversations such as, honey, why didn't you take out the trash, or something small like that, there tends to be three equal threats that show up to that conversation. So it's the threat to one partner, the threat to another partner, the threat to kind of that shared partnership space. But when studies have looked to say, okay, well, what if we talk about something more on the sexual intimacy side of things? There's one threat that is bigger than these other threats, and that's a threat to the self, which means I enter every conversation that I bring up with my partner, I'm going to have some sort of internal driver that is accentuated to protect myself. He's going to show up to the partner or the conversation, and he's going to feel the same way, that he's an internal driver to protect himself. And the reason this is important to understand before I give your audience kind of the first actionable step here is because we need to understand that anytime we're showing up to these conversations and we're protecting ourselves, we are innately showing up in a little bit of that fight or flight type of nervous system energy, because that's what protection does. If we're feeling in any sort of way threatened or unsafe, we show up with that fight or flight type of energy. And that's important because the moment we show up from that place, the way we are when we are in that nervous system space in our brain is we are listening for things that are going to be very, very different than if we were listening from a different part of our brain. So when we show up in the fight or flight state from conversation, now we're listening for things like, did I do it wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Like, do they not like me? Are they going to break up with me? And so we're actually analyzing oftentimes the conversation from that lens versus actually just hearing more from a deeper standpoint what our partner is actually trying to communicate and be curious, right? So how we kind of take a first action step with that is actually to take, in some ways, almost take the I want to change anything conversations off the table. So I don't recommend in step one with this, and I go in my work, I have a huge process I take people through, but for step one, I don't recommend coming in and doing what a lot of people want to do which is like, oh, that thing we tried last night in the bedroom, I don't like that, or you did this and I don't like that, it's not working for him, I want to change. Leave all of that out. And instead, start by telling your partner as specifically as possible the things that you love about your intimate life. And if you're not having sex for whatever reason right now, if it's been a while, you can do this with hugging, you can do this with kissing, you can do this with the way you hold hands. But what you're really doing is you're starting to build that relationship sex conversation bucket.
If you're ready to shake off that daily stress, come join us for online beginner adult ballet and yoga classes each week to connect with the flow of movement and the art of ballet into perfect synergy. Come as you are and learn to love your body a little bit more and gain strength and flexibility with each class. All are welcome. Sign up at balletartsmovement@gmail.com. First class free. Unlock your best life with Soul app. Book a holistic wellness experience with a trained guide and start changing your life today with compassion practices, inner healing, food and diet, and so much more. Tap into a healthier and happier life with the #1 purposeful living app in the US, the Soul app. Link in the description of the podcast.
So when relationship institutes that have studied, like the Gottman Institute, for example, that has done surveys and has analyzed when people are kind of in trouble in their relationship. And what some of their research has found is that when people have a discrepancy from the number of good things they hear versus bad, meaning one bad thing, 5 good things. And if that ratio gets any worse, 2 to 5, for example, that's a big sign the relationship's in trouble. So what we want to do is, with the sex conversation bucket, we want to build this up and up and up and up and up so that we now are training our partner. Talking about sex makes me feel good. Talking about sex makes me feel like I'm doing a lot of things right. It makes me feel like I am providing something for my partner. And we want to build that up typically before we actually even begin to bring in one thing that we're going to change, so that when that we do bring it in, now our partners listen from this place of like, okay, well, maybe I need to change this one thing, but for 2 months I've been hearing all these things I'm doing right. So I know it's like, okay, no big deal to change it one thing. And of course, the exception to this is like, if there's anything that's like, okay, a position or something that's happening that is actually causing pain or, problems, obviously in those scenarios, we want to speak up right away. But provided it's just like, hey, we've been doing this thing for like 15 years and I'm not really feeling it's doing anything for me at this point. Those are the types of things that we really want to hold off on saying until we build that sex conversation love bucket up.
I love this, and everything you mentioned is so true to kind of take into account. And it's kind of like when you talk to kids, you give them like positive reinforcement, and then they feel the reward. They want to do more of the good stuff. So it's such a great way to reprogram your own understanding of how to connect and how to bring up the positive vibes. Like, I work a lot with women and the feminine energy, and talking about like pleasure, expression, sexuality, creativity. That's all part of the sacral chakra. And it's like, if there's blocks there, if there's like a fear or even embarrassment of potentially expressing yourself in a way that you might feel awkward or shame, that can affect the whole connection. Even when you think that your partner has an issue but doesn't, it's like you have these subconscious things going on in the back of your head. How can women steer away from that and even communicate with their partner if they do have these feelings, like uncomfortable with their body or feeling fully expressive, and maybe they feel that's weird or shameful, maybe they have past religious trauma or past traumatic relationship experiences of being judged or overly critical.
Yeah, it's such an important question. And, it's like it brings up this whole conversation that gets talked a lot about in the therapy world of like the big T traumas versus like the little T traumas. And there's big T traumas, of course, abuse, for example, assault. But then there's all the little T traumas, and the little T traumas are things that we oftentimes can like self traumatize. We look in the mirror, maybe we're saying certain things to ourselves that are harmful. And then there's the little T traumas that even come from things that our friends might say, or even past lovers. Sometimes it's as simple as like a past boyfriend, girlfriend, partner taking our clothes off, and maybe they say something in passing that we took as, wow, they think this part of me is ugly, right? Even if they didn't mean it, maybe they did, but maybe they didn't. It doesn't even matter. Like, either way, it's like there's that little T trauma, and all of a sudden we have shame around our body. And there's so much research that has shown that the more confident we are with our body, usually the better sex is. It's not just like, oh, more sex that people have. It's like it actually is better. People are reporting more satisfying sex lives in connection with body confidence. What's also interesting about that is the more sex we have, good sex with a good caring partner, that actually tends to heal body image, and there's research supporting that. So we can get into this vicious cycle. And of course, then there's all the religious, training and the religious shame, which has been a real interesting part of my study. I was raised very, very, very religious. And so I've been going actually back through the Christian Bible, and I'm actually a big fan of a lot of religious values. I think there's a lot of really good things that come out of religion, and I think we interpret things sometimes very out of context. And so, like, one of the things that even from a shame perspective, I found can help if people have that religious upbringing is to realize like certain things, for example, like self-pleasure. Self-pleasure oftentimes is taught as bad. And what's interesting about that is that when we actually look in the Christian Bible, I do not see anywhere, and somebody can correct me, but I've also asked AI, and I have not found anywhere where self-pleasure is actually talked about as bad. And what is talked about oftentimes is you don't want to do anything according to biblical terms that is outside of the relationship. And so I think a lot of self-pleasure has been thought of as bad from a standpoint of, hey, this is going to take away and detract from the relationship, versus actually looking at it and being like, actually, this is the way I heal my body. I know my body more, and I can bring more back into my partnership. So it's an example of, I use that example here, but I think we can apply it and we can extract it out to even these non-religious types of things. It's like, first we need to start to unpack and understand what is happening on our side of things. What is happening where we are, what are we believing? What are we thinking? And what is actually driving our decisions? And then from there, we can start to say, okay, well, what frame is actually more useful? If it's a self pleasure thing, then it's like, wow, this is actually serving my body and my partnership, not taking away. If it's a body confidence thing, one of the things I have found so helpful. And I've been many different sizes throughout my life. I've been 40 pounds heavier. I've been 20 pounds lighter in my adult life. So I have seen a wide of different body types on my body. And, so I've dealt with some of these, some weight changes on, even personally, and seen with how that's affected my sex life and my confidence and all of that. And what I have found though, with most situations with most partners, is that we are way more concerned than they are oftentimes. And one of the most healing things I have found is doing embodiment.
Televital supports focus, energy, immunity, sleep, recovery, and resilience. Start feeling better today on a cellular level with zeolite, super green juice, micronutrient gut support, and more. Get over 50% off your first order for Televital. Link in the description of the podcast. Podpitch is the first and only software that finds, writes, and sends pitches to podcast hosts from your actual email address. Podpitch will make sure you get podcast bookings guaranteed. Link in the description of the podcast.
Practices. And by embodiment practices, I mean things that are going to actually help us feel inside of our body. So, something I would encourage women to consider, you can get some alone time away from kids, spouses, etc., even if it's in a walk-in closet. Undress to your level of like comfort in your body, put on some music, and just start to dance and move and put your hands around the parts of your body that maybe don't feel as sexy to you, and see what those parts, see how they want to move. Because oftentimes we have like this huge disconnection from our body. And when that happens, we're just not tuned into these parts of our body. And by dropping into ourselves and actually beginning to wake up the body, we can start to feel those, those places more. I feel like I'm all over the place here though. There's a lot to be said on this topic. So I do want to pause and just say, like, am I making sense with this?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I was just even thinking about like it's like somatic therapy. I grew up dancing ballet, and now I teach dancers and non-dancers just the art of movement. So I think you're making beautiful points, and yes, it makes total sense that starting to actually love your body, it's so basic. It's like, yeah, start connecting with your body and moving your body as the pace that you feel comfortable with. And I think so often we are kind of programmed to move our body in this quick way or this rushed way. And it's like, yes, we have to slow down and slowly relearn how to love our body. It's a really intimate journey for sure.
It is. And, I'll say another thing that I say this with caution because we have to have a lot of trust in our partner to be able to do this. But if you do have a high level of trust with, with your partner and you're listening, another thing you can do that I have found to be so helpful is realizing that anytime we change our subconscious, like deeply, one of the most profound ways to do that is when we're in an altered state, right? That's the, one of the reasons why people meditate and visualize and that sort of thing. Well, sex, if we're present, creates an altered state. So one thing that we can do, and one of my favorite things is that, talk to my partner ahead of making love. And, if there's anything that I'm feeling self-conscious about my body or my life or anything that I need propped up and, internally, could be my work life, could be my personal life. Just if I'm feeling like not confident about some area, I will actually tell him in advance. And what he will do is, as we are, in that heightened state of pleasure, and as I'm feeling myself really drop into the moment and really drop into the pleasure and let go of things, he'll actually then whisper in my ears things that we've talked about in advance. And what we're really doing there is like reprogramming the subconscious. So, like, and this is like, again, you have to trust your partner to do this because you're going to share with them, some of the areas, your, things that you're probably internally struggling with. But if you do have that level of connection with your partner, of trust, let's say if you're like, wow, I hate my thighs. Let's say if somebody's like, saying that internally, for example, you can have your partner, at the point where you're really feeling vulnerable and feeling open. You've got those brain changes in the middle of making love. your partner can be whispering things in your ear that you feel like would be beneficial for you to believe about this part of your body. And this is a really cool thing because this is how we can use sex not just for pleasure but for healing.
Oh, wow, I love that. That is so interesting. It's kind of like, of course, it's also about manifestation, and it's like positive affirmations mixed in with manifest. And that is so, so cool. I love that. I think it's so cool how I remember my friend was talking about how our bodies are so unique and different. Like some people are more like responsive when it comes to like sexual activity. Some people are more adventurous or spontaneous. So it's like interesting also to learn what how your body reacts, like how your nervous system is, and is it kind of like libido, how it works and how everybody has like a different kind of way it functions.
Oh, completely. Completely. Yeah. I mean, and people are interested in more of that side of things. I would direct everybody over to my free quiz, which is at libidocode.com. It's really cool because when we're talking about, okay, different ways we're functioning from like this healing way, another thing that you'll find at libidocode.com is a way that we actually function as far as our turn-ons and turn-offs. So, like, a lot of people are familiar with Gary Chapman's book, Love Languages, which goes and talks about, like, oh, this person expresses love and shows love in this way, and that person in that way. And I know for me, like, when that book first came out, it was so helpful because I realized, like, not only how my partner at the time was communicating via love, but I also realized my own language. And in doing so, then it helps to, like, ask for what we need, and but also to see how what the other person needs and how to the other person receives love. And it's the same thing for our like sexual turn-ons, and we could say like the sex code, which is why I call it the libido code, because we'll see that one partner needs certain things. Like, for example, one of the types is called a sensate. The sensate type is all about feeling. So the sensate, and it's all about the five senses. So the sensate type is really going to get turned on a lot when the music's just right and the lighting's just right and all these different things. Well, for somebody that's not a sensate, if a sensate and non-sensate are making love, the sensate might abruptly push their partner away, like usually not strongly, but abruptly, and then run over and like put the perfect, song on Spotify, and the partner can be left like, well, what the heck? Like, we were just in the middle of passion. Like, what's happening? But then when we understand that that's our partner's type, what we understand is, oh, for this person, it is worth taking a couple minutes to go and fix that, because it's going to like help them enjoy and drop into the moment so much deeper. So if it's worth it for them to take a second, because they're going to come back and be like, hey, I can go a lot deeper here. So that's a huge, huge, huge point of that. And then once you understand your partner's type, right, then you can do things to help your partner also get turned on more easily. Like, there's a lot of reasons for like desire mismatch, which is one of the things that comes up so commonly with long-term couples, which are my focus. But one thing is, we don't always realize how to turn on our partner because our partner's sex type, our partner's libido code is different, one person to another.
ClickFunnels easily build any type of online business and sales funnel in record time, no matter what your product, service, or niche, without any tech design or experience whatsoever. Try the ClickFunnels 14-day free trial, link in the description of the podcast. Sanger Daniel's online seminar promoting a positive message of self-healing with bioenergy work together with live seminars and remote coaching. Use code BIO20 for a 20% discount for our audience. Link in the description of the podcast. That is so interesting. Yeah, it is so true how it takes so much time to get to know each other, let alone ourselves. So it's a very interesting journey we have to go through. And like I think in terms of like spirituality and spiritual healing, I know so often a lot of women kind of have a wound of not being open to receive. And I think like historically it's kind of like unbalanced there, or like there's some kind of misbalance. So it's like when women are more able to receive and when men are able to give, do you think that is like a big part of uncovering some of the wounds, or that's just like historical based?
I mean, I think that's probably more historical based. I do think, we all have, and like It's a two-part answer. Like, I do think
Yeah.
we all have an element of the masculine and the feminine inside of us, right? We all have the ability to give and to receive. I do find that some men really do well and they actually prefer to receive, and other people and other women may prefer to give more. But it is really interesting, like if you look at like the works of like David Data, who does a lot on polarity play, John Wineland is another one. And if you look at a lot of their work, there is this sexual, say, attraction that really happens when we do have these strong poles of like the giver and the receiver. And I do think for whatever reason, there is a nature versus nurture thing here, but I do think there's a time where people can really get into one of the roles more than another. And when that happens, like oftentimes, like for example, like if somebody's a highly productive person in life and they're really like a, type A, push to the wall, that sort of thing, like that person oftentimes will have a tendency in the bedroom to be more like that giver, that person that's more like leading the reins. But oftentimes that same type of person will find that if they can move into that more receptive role and be more receiver, they'll actually find sex more healing because they're so much in this high type of doing throughout their life. And when they take a moment to actually just be and receive, it actually can be profoundly healing. But sometimes those tendencies also between giving and receiving, what we have a natural inclination to in the bedroom may more represent what we have a natural inclination to in life, and might not be like the best, say, healing thing from a growth opportunity. So, that's the advantage of doing, polarity play, where there is somebody that is like, I am now in this huge giver role and I am now in this huge receiver role. And that can even be established in advance. And, sometimes in erotic repair, when couples aren't active in their sex lives very much and we start to repair that, we actually intentionally set up in advance, like one person is just the giver this week and the other receiver. The next week you're going to try it again, and you switch roles. And we do that in part so that people can actually just really get into that receptiveness of like, what is it like to just receive pleasure without duty, without needing to give back, and just actually to practice what that means.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's super inspiring also, so people can learn to kind of understand it's like a process, and it's like you learn through progression, and it's like a slow journey where you're learning to love yourself again also, because you're going through very intimate parts of your communication, your connection, your expression, and you're experiencing yourself spiritually as well. So many people who are on the spiritual journey are also craving a deeper sexual connection as well, because they feel something that was lacking before was probably part of their wounds, or some kind of past experience shaped their current reality. So there is such a craving to be spiritually and sexually connected. And I think there's such a kind of emerging there as well. Do you think that it also builds like spiritual connection as well, to connect physically in this way?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, I think spiritual connection for the individual as well as for the couple. And, and also from a standpoint of like, growth, as most of us humans, mostly do not have a natural inclination to be very great at asking for what we need and what we want. I think this is one of the common things I hear in modern day society from people, like, it's a big struggle to actually say, okay, I'm going to receive, I'm going to actually ask for something that I want or I need. And so when we're talking about, these conversations, and we see that 92% of couples that are having great sex and that report on surveys of having like wonderful, wonderful sex lives, 92% of them are talking about their sex lives. And so that being said, it's like, okay, well, we have to talk about this for this to get really good, right? Because we can't ever expect our lover to really know what we need in the bedroom. Well, we're all so different person to person. So I don't care how experienced somebody is, they're with a new person, and their bodies are going to respond in different ways, and our bodies change throughout a lifetime. So I think there's a real growth opportunity there for sure with saying, okay, well, we're going to talk about this hard thing and we're going to do this well. because that is a training around asking for our needs and asking for our wants. And then, what great feedback when we can be with a partner that receives it well, because it's actually training the nervous system on a fundamental level to feel safe. I'm safe when I ask for my needs, and then from the spiritual perspective, anytime I like certain types of orgasms have the capacity, both in my own experience and in many others that I've talked with, of helping us feel connected to something greater, God, spirit, energy, whatever anybody calls that force. And certain orgasms can do that. Certain orgasms can just help people like feel almost like the depths of a meditation state around like they're one with that energy. And certainly we see from a standpoint of like connection to our partner and that shared type of heart space, there's so much that happens when we have these chemicals arising. And just for everybody listening, this does not mean that you have to orgasm at the same time in order for that to happen, because I know that's like the great thing that people are always trying to do. And in reality, our bodies are so different, woman to woman, man to man, woman to man. Our bodies are so, so, so different. So that's a fun thing when it happens, but we don't need that to happen to have all of the amazing benefits that I'm mentioning here.
Yeah, so true. I love that. And I love how also you work with monogamous couples. Is there also something about monogamy that also builds stronger intimacy, do you think?
In my experience, yes. And I think there's potential for there to be incredibly strong intimacy in couples that choose other types of relationships. But what I've seen in more like the open relationship scenario is that oftentimes, instead of solving a problem with a partner, oftentimes it's like, well, I'm just not going to get all my needs met with one person. And that's true. Of course, we're never going to get all our needs met, but there's more of a tendency that I've seen in the a more open type of relationship community to say, I'm not going to get my needs met fully here. So rather than fully addressing them, I'm just going to say, hey, I'm just going to go get them met over there. And, and I say this from extreme, awareness. I have tried open relationships twice in my life to end up monogamous in the end. So I both interviewed and talked to a ton of people in that community, both professionally as well as personally. And so when I'm talking about, what I've noticed, this is coming from, pretty decent, like personal and professional education, and not just like what I'm thinking about online. That there really are these tendencies oftentimes for people to say, hey, I'm just going to, get this need fixed over here and this need fixed over there. And this is my person to do that. And obviously, like I said, there's no one person that's going to fill up every part of ourselves of who we are. But I think a huge difference that I've seen is to say, okay, well, let me actually practice and let me put that energy back into my partnership to say, how can we make this more spiritual? How can we make this more loving? How can we make this more novel? How can we make this more passionate? How can we make this more exciting? And what I've seen is that passion does not have to have, we're taught that passion has to fade with relationships. Like if we're practicing something over and over and over again, we actually should be getting better at it. So, so a lot of my work is teaching people why that doesn't happen, and the science and the chemistry of the brain on why that doesn't happen and how we can actually make it happen again.
Amazing insight. Wow. I learned so much just from listening to you right now. So,
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Dr. Diane. It was such a beautiful kind of breath of fresh air of information and super, super interesting. I'm sure our listeners will learn so much about relationships, connection, communication, and the art of partnership in kind of like a holistic way. I think we are craving this, I think, on a collective and personal level, to be able to honestly and intentionally express ourselves and deepen sexual relationships. So thank you once again for coming on the podcast. And where can people connect with you and see your content as well?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me share a couple exciting things. So my book is basically out now, so it's called Want to Want It. So you can go to wanttowantit.com to get that. So that's one important resource. And I did give everybody the Libido code resource earlier, but it's super easy website of mine where I have a ton of free content, plus all of my favorite products, most of for discounts. That if people go to hotsex.com. You'll see all my freebies plus other, fun content on there. So really the two URLs that'll get you to some of my best stuff are wanttowantit.com and haveHotSex.com. Thank you, Ari. Thanks, everybody.